All right, everybody, happy Thursday. We've got another great show for you today at LEARNin 1031 Live. My name is Chris Astillero with Exchange Resources. Welcome to our show. All right, and before we dive into this segment of today, it's going to be an exciting show. We've got some really amazing guests today that specializes in DSTs, and we also have a realtor here as well that's going to dive deep into the 1031 and the DSTs and the benefits. But before we do that, let's thank our sponsor. Bernardo, we've been around for over 26 years and we've done over 60,000 tax deferred exchanges. If you don't do a 1031 tax deferred exchange, you could be faced with about 30 to 40% in taxes, right? Wouldn't you rather roll that over to the next property so that you can buy more with it? Well, we're here to give you your options. Let's talk. All right, and thank you, Exchange Resources, for sponsoring today's show. Thank you so much. Hey, we're here. Erica Traulsen, John Case. We're going to have an amazing show today. Erica, if you wouldn't mind, ladies first, please introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So I am Erica Traulsen with Legacy Investments and Real Estate. I am an investment advisor and I specialize in working with landlords and their realtors and helping them find a passive solution to their real estate headaches. So typically those of you who may have owned property for 10, 15, 20 years, some of my clients 40 years, have huge appreciated properties, huge capital gains, and we're going passive with those investments through the 1031 exchange into something called the Delaware Statutory Trust. We'll get into that pretty soon here, but I love specializing in this. We are real estate specialists in this investment world. So that's me, Erica Traulsen, Legacy Investments and Real Estate.
Thank you, Erica. Always great to have you in this show. You're so knowledgeable with DSTs. John, please introduce yourself. We have a very special guest, John. Please let us know who you are.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on again. John Case with Duomo Realty out of Rancho Bernardo, North County. Attorney broker associate with Duomo Realty Corp. And specializing, I'll be honest, guys, primarily in those tough to get closed transactions. As a result of the legal background and the years of experience in this business, I found a nice little niche in being able to help those folks that don't quite know in which direction to take things and being able to get them into a place that benefits everyone. I like to build win-wins. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm here today, to learn more about DSTs.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for being on the show today. We have the specialist, Erica, who handles DSTs, and she's going to show us what it is and how it benefits, the baby boomers, especially a lot of the people who are not wanting to manage properties anymore. And John Case is here so that we can talk to an actual realtor in this show who really wants to know a lot more about how the baby boomers and these investors can use the 1031 as a tool to get into these passive investments where they don't have to manage properties anymore. So great to have you both on the show today. We're going to really quickly go over just a couple tidbits of the 1031 exchange. So if you wouldn't mind putting up that slide really quick, Emerson. But before we do that, let's really talk about the Silver Tsunami, right? Erica, what is the Silver Tsunami? What is going on? And how can we be at the right place at the right time to be able to help these people, and what is it? How did this happen?
Yeah, so there are so many people turning 65 every day, and I don't know about all of them. Maybe some wouldn't love the term Silver Tsunami. My mother, for instance, who keeps her beautiful red hair, however she manages that. But she these boomers that are turning 65 more and more and more every day, right? It was called the baby boomer generation for a reason. There was this huge boom of population growth, right? Like after the Second World War, and all those people are hitting 65 now, or older. So I just pulled up this stat from my phone from a presentation I was at the other day. It said by 2030, so in 4 years, right? 3.5 years, nearly 1 in 4 Californians is expected to be an older adult of 60 plus. Wow. So, and that's from mpa.aging.ca.gov. So like it's the California government website. 1 in 4 Californians is going to be over the age of 60 in 3.5 years. It's a quarter of our population. I would call that a tsunami, right? So
that is huge. That is huge.
And I don't know about you, but like for me in my 30s, like I don't love managing property. You know, we do it because we can and we have to. We're building our legacy now. But those people who are twice my age don't really want to climb under the sink on a Saturday when they'd rather be on the golf course, right? So this silver tsunami of people, like we're looking out for them, trying to find solutions with partners like you two here. To figure out what can we do as more and more of these adults hit that. They don't want to be doing it, right?
And so you hit it right on the nail, Erica, where there's the younger generation who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s are still building up their wealth. They still have the energy, the strength, the flexibility to be able to be patient with these tenants during that time. But when they reach a certain point where they're just dealing with these properties that are maybe just too difficult to handle, or there's just too much debt service, there's just too much money that they need to reinvest into getting the property to where it needs to be so that they can get the rent to where it needs to be. I think that's where the dilemma is. Like your 70s and 80s, you really don't want to do that anymore. There's a lot of people who don't, right, John? I probably, in your case, you probably seen a lot of investors who are just, tired of keeping the properties for their heirs.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've been doing this now long enough to where my young investors aren't young anymore. They're getting right. They're getting up there in age. And so this brings up a very interesting opportunity, especially for folks who are looking to sidestep or potentially transition into different activities. I can tell you, as a former landlord myself, that it is an act. People like to call it passive income. I fight a little against that. The reality is there's a lot of activity. I can hear you in the background. There's a lot of activity,
passive, my friend.
Right? Well, it's funny because you get sold that idea. It's a passive way to make money, right? You just have to get the property, put your tenants in place, and then you're good to go. Until, like Erica noted, it's a Saturday afternoon, and now I'm fixing a toilet, or at least having to be there to talk to a plumber, as opposed to being where I want to be, which is probably not doing that. So
on vacation,
right, exactly.
On a cruise,
anything but fixing toilets. And so, having been in those situations in the past, this vehicle offers a great opportunity, I think, for folks who may not be aware that it's even out there.
Yep. Or they're afraid. They're afraid because they don't know the option that they can actually defer their capital gains, do a 1031 exchange, and get into this passive type of investment where they own a portfolio of real estate, a fractional ownership, which just continues, immediately once they're locked in, then they immediately start getting their cash flow like about a month afterwards, right, Erica? As soon as they get in, right? So tell us more about the DSTs, Erica, and how that works specifically for this generation.
Yeah, so DST stands for Delaware Statutory Trust. It's just the title for this type of investment. It's a package. The trust is the package for real physical real estate, and therefore it's eligible for a 1031 exchange. So in your 1031, you can sell essentially any investment property, any investment real estate held for income appreciation purposes, into basically any other type of investment property, right? Not your primary residence, your personal home, but a beach rental. You could convert, 1031 exchange rather, into a hotel, or you can, 1031 exchange into a shopping mall. All of these types of properties are eligible for 1031 exchanges. DSTs are under this category as well, because they are those types of income properties, or rentals, things like that. But they're going to be on a much larger scale than the typical retail investor has. So someone with a maybe $850,000 home in La Jolla, or Del Mar, they could 1031 exchange into a DST and be a fractional investor now in that DST. So if it's a $100 million property, they exchange just their portion, what their exchangeable amount is from the home that they sold, or the other commercial real estate maybe that they sold. They are going to 1031 exchange and become a truly passive investor. So like you just said a moment ago, how passive is it to own real estate and be a landlord? Sometimes not very. So once you've made the choice into what DSTs you're going to invest in, you get to be completely hands off for the duration of the lifetime of that DST. And what I mean by that is eventually it sells, because we make money in real estate in two ways. One is income. The other is appreciation, which you only recognize once you sell the property. So just like any other real estate, we buy it, we hold it, we get some income from it, hopefully, as long as it's income generating. Vacant land, not going to give you income, but then that you're holding for appreciation. So you're going to 1031 exchange. You have some income during the lifetime of the DST. When it sells, you get that appreciation potential as well. And it's just a very nice, tidy, clean. You never have to deal with the tenants' toilets and trash ever again if you're staying in a DST.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Erica. So we have a question from a viewer, and it can be John, if you can start with that, and then maybe Erica, you can follow up with it. If a property owner dies without a trust or estate plan, what actually happens to their real estate portfolio, and how much can probate cost the family?
Okay.
So, John, if you can go ahead and start.
I want John to tackle the probate.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we'll do it real quick here. The reality is, it's the short answer is a lot as far as the cost, right? The idea behind the trust is that it provides you a vehicle for easier transfer and management upon the death of the property owner, right? And so in essence, the reason the trust exists is because that is the vehicle that truly owns the property. And then you have a management position, the trustee, who actually handles and takes care of the necessary activity to maintain the trust and keep the property going. When that doesn't happen, when the property is owned by an individual, now, and especially, for example, I'm guessing the question is saying there may not be a will or instructions. The will is simply a set of instructions that take place upon the death of the decedent, right? So if there are no instructions, well, now we have to figure out, where does this property go? Who gets it? Who gets to control it? And ultimately, who's going to be the beneficiary of that estate? And so things can get complicated quickly, especially when we're dealing with multiple properties. One property, your single family residence, potentially the family can figure things out, and the process could be simplified. But in the event where multiple properties are owned, potentially maybe in different states, things start to get complicated fast. And really what the probate court does is oversee that process to ensure that the people who are stepping up and say that they are the proper individuals to handle and manage that estate moving forward truly are those folks. And that essentially means getting in line, waiting for an opportunity to get in front of the court and then make your case. And as you can imagine, that's not cheap or fast. I can tell you here in San Diego, oftentimes the probate courts are backed up. And so it is a first come, first served scenario most of the time, unless there's, other circumstances that could potentially play a role, which means that in essence, you're sitting there waiting until your turn. And in the meantime, there's still management, there's still upkeep, there's still taxes, there's still payments. There's a whole lot of things that still need to keep going, and not having an estate plan can certainly complicate things significantly.
Thank you so much, John. That was a really great summary. Well, what happens if you're not prepared?
On that note, probate.
Erica?
My mom has 8 siblings.
Okay.
She has 3 sisters, 3 step siblings, and 2 half siblings, right? So my mom's father passed away, and there's 9 kids. Luckily they all get along well enough to have dealt with it on their own. But had they had to go to probate and decide, who gets what, or who gets the house versus other assets, could have just been so much messier. And I mean, they all did have to figure out what to do in terms of, do we, keep renting it out? Do we, does someone move in? Does someone, and if they move in, are they buying out the other siblings? Or are they just getting it because, one sibling lived there to help take care of my grandpa for a while, like most of them wanted to sell it. Once they wanted to sell it, like, whose realtor are they using? So like there were 9 opinions coming from all different directions. And like I said, luckily they got along, or well enough to have dealt with it. But like, had they not, a lot of adult children, a parent passes away and they end up in probate. There's kind of a holding period for probate, isn't there, John?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, because there's this notice requirement, right? You have to let creditors know this event has happened. You have to let other beneficiaries know this is the action we're planning on taking. Oh, guess what? I don't want to take that action. So now I'm going to object to taking that action. So now more time gets added to the docket. So especially for those folks who are sitting in a position where they have real value to pass along, you do have assets that are going to be outliving you in a sense. I highly encourage you to have a plan. Chris and I talked about this in the 1031 exchange scenario a couple of weeks ago of not dropping this on your realtor of like, oh, I'd like to do a 1031 and let's start tomorrow, right? This is even more important, right? As part of your overall portfolio. Once you begin to acquire property, you now have a true asset to basically pass on to other folks. But the only way that really happens efficiently, as Erica noted, is if you have a plan in place, because if not, you would be surprised the people that come out of the woodwork trying to lay claim on something that potentially may not be theirs, but their voice will still be heard, and that will slow down everything significantly.
On that note, do you think that like always having your real estate in a trust of some sort is kind of a best case, like best practice?
I do, because it offers clear instruction ideally, right? You want to go to a good, by the way, you want to go to a good attorney as far as putting this together as well. There's a lot of complexities that go into this, right? But to directly answer your question, Erica, yes, I think potentially having that vehicle there to help you manage and oversee the asset is important. And especially because you can designate a trusted individual to oversee things for you should something happen to you. Ideally too, as an attorney, one of the things I do encourage everybody, especially, for example, my first-time home buyers, one of the first conversations that we have upon closing on the home is you now have something of value. You now have an asset, and you need to protect that asset. And there are vehicles and documentation that you can put in place to do that. But the only way that happens is if you're proactive in doing so. This is something that's optional. You don't have to have a will. You don't have to have a trust. California will be glad to step in your place and say, we have a plan for your money. Absolutely. We have a great plan for your money, right? But if the plan is for you to control your money, well, then you have to put that instruction in place.
Okay, we have another question, you guys. The question is, what are the risks of holding onto aging investment properties without an exit strategy as maintenance costs, insurance, and liability continue to rise?
Well, the question was partly answered right there, right? Maintenance costs, insurance, liability. I'm working with an investor right now in, oh gosh, it's just escaped my head. I'm blaming new mommy brain. For those of you who don't know me yet, I have a 9-week-old at home. So hence the background here, because I'm in my office and it's a little not as nice as my office. But she, her cousin is a realtor, and her cousin's in her 50s, and this woman's in her 80s. She's, one of the older siblings' kids versus the youngest siblings' kids. That family has 13 aunts and uncles, right? For this gal. So anyway, this realtor called me and says, my 80-year-old cousin in Palo Verde, maybe somewhere like that. But she called me and she said she has this property, and she's been the management hasn't been her main issue, because one of the tenants actually does a lot of the management of the property. But she's just increasingly concerned about liability. She's worried about someone falling on the property, or repaving the parking lot, to make sure that there aren't potholes, and that everything's 100% up to par and that she can't, be liable for anything. And it gets costly after a while. It's an older property and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm glad you called me. This is the perfect type of, solution for someone who's concerned about liability. So in a Delaware statutory trust, for instance, it acts like a limited liability company. You have no liability as the investor. You are truly 100% passive. You get to go from having all of those headaches about, well, I'm originally from Chicago. And in that scenario, I think of someone slipping on ice, right? It's like if you didn't shovel the sidewalk in front of your house, if you didn't put down, sand or salt, something to either increase the grip or melt the snow, and someone slips on the sidewalk in front of your house, even though it's like a public sidewalk, you are liable, right? So that's insane. And this is Southern California, but concerned about any of those things. Someone trips in your parking lot over one of the little bumper thingies, and she's concerned about getting sued. And she's 80, and for most people, this investor included, real estate is their largest asset. So if it's taken away from you in any way, or, you get sued for $1 million and the property itself is $1 million, it's like you've just lost so much of your, hard-earned, potentially generational wealth that you can hand down to your kids. And for what? So this liability becomes a really big issue the longer you hold on to it. And when you're older, oftentimes living off of, the income from your property, but otherwise, like Social Security, things like that, and no longer working, that can be like a huge hit to your net worth, to your legacy. In the end.
Is. And I think from the law perspective, John, the liability is a really key issue because my mother just renews her insurance policy. She had to get an umbrella policy for $2 million, and then the liability, and she's already in her mid 80s. Just like you said, she's afraid to get sued, right? If you get sued, that could be your entire net worth. It's just gonna, that's gonna be taken away from you. So let's get into the next slide and go into the 1031s into DSTs. So a 1031 exchange has been around for over 100 years, and it's helped, generations create wealth for their families, create more cash flow, create, just a legacy. So in order to get into this DST, to the Delaware Statutory Trust, investors have to qualify to do a 1031 exchange. And there's three things that they need to be aware of. It has to have been held as an investment property, okay, for at least 2 tax years or 2 years. We always recommend that they talk to their CPA, a tax advisor, so that they know what the benefits are of the 1031 exchange. Held it for investment purposes. Number 2 is intent, that they intend to hold the replacement property or the next property that they own as an investment property, and their intent is not to live in it. And number 3, same taxpayer selling must be the same taxpayer purchasing the property. Are they the same taxpayer that's selling? Will they be the same taxpayer purchasing the property? So those are the 3 qualifying questions of whether or not they're qualified for the 1031. If they are, then they could roll into a like-kind property. And a DST is considered like-kind property because it is real estate. It's a portfolio of real estate, which includes senior housing, student housing, multi-units, commercial property, triple net leases. Erica will do an analysis of the scenarios for the investors to find out, okay, if you held the property, what are your benefits for holding the property? You want to continue to manage these tenants? You want to keep continuing to, pay for all this debt servicing? Number 2, what if you sell the property and just pay the taxes? That's 30 to 40% in taxes. If you just sold the property, that's going to go to the federal government and you're never going to see it again, right? And the third scenario is if you sold it and rolled it into a DST, what type of cash flow are you really going to get? What type of, monthly cash flow? How many years are you going to be involved within this DST? How are you going to get that appreciation at the end? So these are just some of the things that Erica will analyze, and we'll go over each investor to make sure that it's a right investment for them. It's all about risk. Every investment has risk, right, John? Right, Erica? There's no guarantee that it's going to be, there's no guarantee with anything. So there's risks involved with any investment, and that's why they have to be an accredited investor in order to invest in these types of properties. So that's a 1031 exchange, utilizing that to get into the DST. So, right, Erica?
Yeah, Chris, a lot of people don't know what it means to be an accredited investor. It's a very like kind of niche term, I guess, but accreditation means one of two things. Either you have a net worth of $1 million, and that can be outside of your primary residence. So the value of the physical home that you live in doesn't count. Assets inside of it, of course, does. That Rolls Royce in your garage counts towards your net worth. But your $1 million net worth, which in the San Diego County can basically be one rental home sometimes, right? One or two, or having $200,000 of income or $300,000 if filing jointly, for at least 2 years with the expectation to do the same in the current year. So, for most people, again, this baby boomer Silver Tsunami generation, typically that can be one home in Southern California. A client of mine has a condo that's just $850,000, no debt, and it's fully depreciated at this point. That $850,000 is the majority of their net worth. That other 150 is in other assets, but you can add up to being an accredited investor pretty quickly if you own investment real estate in Southern California.
Thanks for clarifying that, Erica. A lot of people really don't know about that. John, now that you know about the 1031s and you've done a couple 31s in the past, how do you feel about now knowing a little bit about the DSTs and then giving that as an option to your investors to roll into this passive income, especially if they're elderly and if they're over 65?
Right. Erica had mentioned if prior to the conversation, if I had thought about anybody that this vehicle would be a great fit for, and as a matter of fact, I do. This being a relatively new thing, I guess, in a sense, not to your point, not a lot of people know about it. And then in addition, the qualifications, obviously you have to make sure that you meet the criteria, but being able to, aside from that, from my perspective, if you really are looking for true passive income, right? We're basically handing over the management to somebody else. We're handing over the oversight to somebody else. I'm really just collecting payments. It sounds like on a monthly basis. Correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you receive payments monthly.
Yeah.
So in essence, for my money, if I meet all those qualifications, why wouldn't I want to do that? Especially if I've held this property for X amount of years. We talked about the maintenance issue a second ago, but I do want to highlight the fact that oftentimes as we age, our income diminishes and the income property becomes the sole or a majority of where we get our income from. And so you find that there's a little bit of a deferred maintenance. There's a little bit less attention paid to the structure itself as money is diversified into other things as opposed to the rental itself. And so when it comes time to dispose of it, that can affect the overall value of what you're selling. So potentially you might want to consider, before it ever gets to the point where it's like a dilapidated scenario where all of a sudden you're going to take a big loss, why not roll it into something else that potentially protects that value, gives you that passivity, and you get the monthly income that you were looking for in this overall venture anyway. Makes sense to me.
Great. Thanks, John.
I wrote down so many notes about what you said. Well, just to touch on the fact that DSTs are not a new thing. They're just new to many investors and people in this space because they are securitized, right? And so for listeners, what I mean by that is, securities is the SEC, securities market, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. We all know what those are. Many of us know what REITs are, REITs, real estate investment trusts. Those are not eligible for 1031 exchanges, which I won't touch on right now, but you cannot exchange into a REIT. You can exchange into DSTs, but DSTs as a structure have existed. It's a Delaware statutory trust. It's a type of trust, formed in the state of Delaware. They've been around for about 105 years, if I'm remembering correctly. But anyway, early 1900s. But they became part of the tax code in real estate eligible for a 1031 exchange like this in 2004. So why don't more investors know about it? Because it is a security and it's a private investment, a private placement security. So what that means is we're not advertising on the news, in magazines and the newspaper. So the type of investment that it is really, really restricted on the amount that you can advertise and talk about it. That's why you have to learn about it kind of word of mouth from your realtor, your broker. and from places like this. So it's a different type of investment, and that is in order to protect the investors. That's again why the accreditation status is there as well. The SEC considers people with $1 million net worth to be a more savvy investor. Those two accreditation options. There's a third that may be added soon, which is supposed to be like a test you could take and pass that deems that you're an accredited investor. So let's say your net worth is $800,000, not $1 million. You could still become eligible. That's in the works. But people do need to know about it. You're going to learn about that from most frequently your agent or broker. And you asked why people might not want to invest in it. Liquidity, right? So if you want to have, you think, okay, I'm getting older. What if I have hospital bills in the next, 5 to 10 years and you need, I don't know, $10,000. We get that a lot where someone goes, well, what if I need to pull some money out? It's like, well, if you hold on to your piece of real estate, your single family home in Rancho Bernardo, how do you pull $10,000 out? Do you sell off just the bathroom? That's not, you can't really do that just to pull out a little bit. You can try to cash out refinance or something, but that can be hard when you're living on a fixed income. If you're retired and you have the fixed income, it's pretty tough to do a cash out refi sometimes, especially in a rental home, not your own property. So, it is illiquid, but when you sell the whole property and you 1031 exchange it, you don't have to do a complete 100% 1031 exchange. You could sell an $850,000 property and only exchange $800,000 or $750,000, right? Now you have, you're going to pay the taxes on any amount you don't exchange, right, Chris? So we do this all the time. A mixed exchange, a combination exchange, a partial exchange, so that boot is the amount that's left over that you're going to end up paying taxes on. And for a lot of people, that makes sense, and that's something that we do help with analyzing on our end. Is if you're going to take out a certain amount to have liquidity, versus selling the whole property, right? Who needs to sell and pay 40% on the entire value of the property? Hopefully no one has $1 million of cash that they need at the drop of a hat. They sell $1 million property. Maybe you just need $100,000. Let's exchange the rest.
Well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Real quick, Chris. Erica, you brought up an excellent point, which is potentially it allows for that diversification that you're talking about, right? But you have your $1 million property, maybe half of it I need to continue. I take the hit on the taxes for the half that I need to keep to live, but now I can continue to protect that legacy to give on to that next generation by putting it into this vehicle where I know it'll be managed. There'll be the oversight, everything that goes into what traditionally would be the management that you would do over the physical property. Now we've given that to somebody else. I still get the benefit of having some cash on hand, and my investment continues, as opposed to all of a sudden, you have cash on hand. It usually tends to leave the hand, and all of a sudden you have no cash.
Yeah, absolutely. That tends to happen. Yep. But all very good points. Let's move on to the next slide really quick. So we're segueing into protecting your legacy now, right? So how does that happen? When you're going to a DST, Erica, let's say I'm an investor, okay, I'm 75 years old. I'm tired of managing this property. I've got $2 million that I made as far as gain, and I want to roll it into doing a 1031 exchange. It goes, and then you do your analysis to find out what DSTs are good for me based on my risk level. So when it gets into the DST, how does that DST protect that legacy for the heirs? Because obviously, when the heir dies, what happens when the heirs die? Are they going to get taxed on that gain? What's going to happen to that legacy, to those DSTs?
Do you mean when the property owner dies and the heirs inherit it?
Yes, correct.
Or the heirs too. They're hopefully they're still holding real estate down the road.
Yeah.
But the beneficiaries, whether it's an heir, children of the original property owner or other beneficiaries, they get a stepped up basis. So your cost basis is more complicated than this, but basically what you purchased the property for, minus any depreciation, adding back in some capital expenditures. But your cost basis is the amount that helps determine what is your capital gain. So if you have $1 million property and a $200,000 cost basis, that $800,000 is your gain. That's the amount you're going to pay taxes on. For a lot of people who've owned the property for a long time, it could have fully depreciated, and the entire value of the property is the gain. And don't forget, you are taxed on the depreciation recapture as well. Again, we won't dive into that right now, but it's another tax that helps add up to that potentially 40% when you're a California property owner. So by doing a 1031 exchange into something like a DST, you end up continuing to hold real estate. Your cost basis and your gain follow you through the exchange into the new property. But even in a DST where you get to be fully passive and hands-off, your beneficiaries get the stepped up basis. So now, using the same numbers I just used, that $200,000 cost basis, $800,000 gain, the day that the property owner, the DST investor passes away, the cost basis steps up to the current market value. So up to that $1 million, if that's where we still are. And what does that mean for the inheritor? It means that your capital gains reset starting at $1 million. So that would happen, if you still own the rental property yourself, $1 million property, your beneficiaries inherit it, they get the stepped up basis $2 million. And if they sell it that day, there are going to be no capital gains taxes on that property if they sell it right when it's, at the same value that the stepped up basis went to. But with the DST, let's say you have 2 kids and you just determine, you invest, diversify into 2 DSTs, maybe one gets one gets the other, or you invest in any number of them and you give them 50-50 inheritance in those DSTs. It really, really simplifies the estate plan. It helps your legacy to live on with the stepped up cost basis. And it can just really simplify things for the beneficiaries. My mom and her 8 siblings having to figure out how to do an estate sale on this property and then sell it and whose realtor they're using and yada, yada. It took months and months, not just because there were 9 of them, but because he owned the property until he passed away, using the garage for storage and the rest of it can be a rental. But in his case, he should have cleared everything out during his lifetime, just done the passive investing, and his kids could have gotten whatever 100% divided by 9 would be. It can really simplify things for the investor.
But it seems like when the investors roll their gain and do a 1031 exchange into a DST, it seems like it's a lot more manageable as far as who gets what. I mean, some of these siblings may not even be talking to each other. Some of them don't get along with each other, don't even want to see each other. So by just having this DST and everybody gets a portion of that DST, a fractional ownership of the passive income where they continue to have it. That's I think that's a great plan as far as helping protect that legacy. What do you think, John?
Well, yes, no, I agree 100%. And it got me thinking, for example, as far as, I'm curious, Erica, how long does this vehicle last, or how long, if I'm parking my money in a DST, what is my expectation of, for example, when I have to take an action again? Obviously, I did the 1031. I was able to roll it into the DST. Now I'm just passively collecting my income. How long? What's the time horizon on that? And do I have to think about down the road doing another 1031 exchange? Do I just cash out at the end? Could you give me a little bit of feedback on that front?
Yeah, great question. So just like I mentioned earlier, you can't just sell off your bathroom to get your $10,000, right? So the property itself, the whole property held in the DST will sell at some point. The goal of the sponsors, the term we use for the person who, or the company rather, that acquires, manages, and eventually disposes of the property. There is an ideal disposition timeline that the sponsor has at the beginning. And that's typically 5 to 7 years for most of these properties, up to 10 years. Some have a shorter time horizon where they might be going into a REIT through a vehicle called the 721 UPREIT. We won't touch on that today. Maybe that's a good topic for a future episode, Chris. So we'll think about that.
Next one.
So, but with these, this time horizon of kind of maxing out at about 10 years, 5 to 7 year ideally in most of them, the sponsor is going to sell the whole property, which means that the DST will dissolve after that. And all of the investors will have the opportunity then to, again, either cash out and pay the taxes or do another 1031 exchange. And for most of them, they are just rolling over into another DST through another exchange. Again, just to kind of continue this idea of waiting until there's a stepped up basis, deferring the taxes, kick the can down the road until they kick the can. Was that morbid?
Kick the can down the road. Oh, they kick the can.
They kick the can, yeah.
So just, continue to kick the taxes can down the road until you don't have to worry about taxes anymore. And your beneficiaries get the stepped up basis. So, 5 to 7 years is the average. Some have gone shorter, some a little longer. It kind of depends on the market, right? They don't want to ideally have to sell in a down market if they don't have to. But we are looking for good input from the sponsors on each property on what they think the market will be doing, and they're looking really in depth into market trends and what their predictions are for the future. But yeah, so the idea is another 1031 exchange. On occasion, we have someone say, "Hey, I was doing a 1031 exchange. This property fell through. I need somewhere to put my money," and they have to agree and understand that they can't just pull it out in a year when they find their ideal, property that they wanted to purchase with that $500,000 maybe. But they're agreeing to stay in the DST for the lifetime of the investment with very, very limited potential to pull any cash out before then. But it's around that, typically that time horizon, 5 to 7 years or so.
Yeah. So Erica, there's a lot of details as far as just DSTs and getting it, doing a 1031 into the DST. Can you tell them about the class that we're going to have on Monday, the 11th at Exchange Resources? At 16855 West Bernardo Drive in San Diego. We're going to have a deep dive into 1031s and DSTs. So if any of you investors, any of your clients, John, if you can participate, we're going to dive really deep into the DSTs and how everything works, so that there's that everybody understands what a benefit is for a lot of these baby boomers.
Yeah.
Erica, tell us about the class.
So if you're watching this on LinkedIn, or if you're not, head to the LinkedIn recording after. I just put a link in the chat for the class on Monday. So we are, like he said, doing a deep dive into, going beyond the 1031 exchange. And, we subtitled this "The Secret Weapon of Top Producing Agents." So, this is
John.
There you go. Yeah.
John will be there. I'm excited. So, what should savvy real estate professionals know about 1031 exchanges and DSTs? Hopefully everything, right? And we won't have enough time to get into everything. For that, we have a course called DST University. That is a typically 3.5 hour course all about DSTs. So you got to be willing to commit to that one. But the next one will be sometime virtually in June. Monday. I forget the date off the top of my head.
Yeah, let me know. I'd like to join. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an awesome class. We've been working on it and refining it at Legacy for about 1.5 years now. And it's a great opportunity to learn, everything you could possibly want to know about DSTs. But this class on Monday, like I said, the link is in the chat on LinkedIn, and it's Monday 12:30 to 2. So 12:30 to 1, come grab some lunch, mix and mingle, network with each other, meet us in person. And then the next hour, Chris and I will be spending chatting about 1031s, DSTs, answering your questions live. And then, what I love to do in person is say, hey, bring us an idea, a question, a thought about a client you have or a prospect you have who you'd like to talk to about this option, someone who's an aging investor and they're just like, no, I gotta keep the property because my kids want it. Do your kids want the property, or do they want the equity that you built in the property over the
I would say it's usually not the property. It's usually
I'm an outlier of like, I would have loved the property that my parents had in Northern California, and then they sold it when I was off in grad school, and there was nothing I could have done about it at the time. But man, I gave them such a hard time for selling that property because I would have loved to raise my kids there. But they sold it. But I'm like the outlier, right? So most people, they don't want the property. That was in Northern California. I'm in San Diego, and I can't manage a property that far away with two kids. I could have lived in it, but so they didn't keep it. And most of the time people don't want to inherit the property that their parents have as a rental or, commercial property, especially. They'd rather just inherit the wealth that's been built through it.
Right.
Perfect. Well, let's get on to the next slide. Let's just go over some of the takeaways. But before we do that, I want you all to give our viewers your contact information, your phone number, and possibly your email. Let's start with Erica. Go ahead and give them your phone number so that we can reach you for questions regarding DSTs and the class on Monday.
Well, thanks, Emerson, for throwing it at the bottom of the screen there. But
there you are. It's right there. Okay. Well,
Legacy IRE for investment real estate. Erica at legacyire.com. My number is 619-848-1139. So please do call or text me at that number if you have questions. I'd love to chat.
And John, our viewers who are interested in looking for an investment property or just any property in your area, what's a phone number that they can reach you at, and what's an email best?
Oh, there it is right there. I love it, Emerson. Thank you.
So
there you go. We'll start with the phone number first, right? Phone number is 858-776-5761. The email's a little long, as you can see right there, john.duomorealty@gmail.com. And actually just live as of earlier today, you can find me at thatguyjohn.com. Super easy.
Thatguyjohn.com.
Thatguyjohn.com.
Pulling it up now.
There it is.
Perfect. And my name is Chris Astillero with Exchange Resources, 619-215-6937. It's Astillero at exchangeresources.net. We're here to answer any of your questions. We look forward to seeing everybody at that class, where we're going to dive in. Okay, so guys, what are the takeaways for you? Like, John, you came in here not really knowing about DSTs. What's your key takeaway for today?
I'll be honest. The thing that stuck with me were the triple T's that we want to try to avoid, which is tenants, toilets, and trash. We want to make sure that we can essentially, sunset that and move on to bigger and better. I love this idea of truly passive income. I can't tell you how many times, guys, we have this conversation, and I caution people. The investment side requires work. There's no free lunch. You're inevitably going to be called in on some type of scenario where you're going to need to be actively involved. So if true passivity is what you're looking for, and Erica, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like this is the perfect vehicle for that.
I do tend to agree. Yeah.
Erica, your takeaway.
I feel like I dropped a lot of the takeaway, so I dropped the problems on you. But I guess a takeaway for my investors, investors on the call or realtors on the call, if you're not sure, give me a call, right? Reach out to me either through one of our platforms here, the school platform that LEARNin Local Live uses too. I'm on there at the phone number, email that we just gave. I would love to do a cash flow analysis on a property, on your own property or your client's property. I have a questionnaire that will show a true, genuine net cash flow. And it's going to illustrate, a comparison between what you currently own and your potential to earn in a DST. So that's, a lot of people think, oh, I get $5,000 a month. That's, such and such percent per year. A lot of people are thinking that they have a 4 or 5% cash flow or higher. I had someone tell me she had a 10% cash flow. And I was like, can we run these numbers just for fun? But I ran numbers on behalf of.
The number come out to be.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact, but I was like, it was
-1.
Yeah, there you go. I was close.
Yeah, her face was hilarious. A lot of it came from like the deferred maintenance costs, right?
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
They don't take that into account.
$30,000 roof replacement, man, that eats at your bottom line, even over a number of years. So that's a big deal at the end of the day.
Well, good takeaway, guys. And as far as my takeaway, I think it's there's a lot of investors and baby boomers out there who don't know that this option is available and that they're afraid. It's really fear of paying those taxes, fear of losing their purse, fear of losing their money, right? And then fear of not,
not knowing
that legacy. Fear of not protecting their legacy. Yeah. So those are the different things that my takeaway, that this alleviates a lot of that. But obviously, Erica, that not all, DSTs are created equal. Some are a lot better than others, and there's some that are just not very good because their numbers just don't make sense, or when you underwrite it, it just doesn't make sense for your investors. But Erica is a professional. She's very knowledgeable. She's an expert in doing these customized analysis for the investors to find out what's right for them based on what their risk level is. So the key takeaway also is another one is, you have to make that call so that you can find out what it is that you can actually get. If you don't take any action, then you could lose that investment, or you can continue to pay that debt servicing, or you could continue dealing with all the toilets, tenants, and trash. I mean, if you want that type of life, or do you want the freedom to be able to spend more time with your grandkids, go travel, do the things that you need to do, and then that check is going to be waiting in your mailbox where you don't have to deal with all of this turmoil. So the last thing I want to say is that one thing that you want to ask these investors, John, when you're talking to these investors, and Erica always tells me, how do you like being a landlord?
That's a loaded question.
Quiet. How do you like being a landlord? Yeah. And then they're just going to open up to you and say, well, they either love it because they're young and they have the energy to be able to still deal with all the headaches of being a landlord, or they're maybe in their 60s where they're just tired of it. So how do you like being a landlord? Even maybe put a postcard to all of these absentee owners with somebody pulling their hair out because they're tired of being a landlord. And that big question, how do you like being a landlord? If you don't, call John, right? He can go over that with you, and then Erica can go over the DSTs with you. So I think that for me is a big takeaway, is that fear. But we want to alleviate those fears and make sure that you get the right consultation with the right professionals, 1031 exchange, DSTs, the right realtor for you, who's knowledgeable and who's also an attorney. I mean, he's got the best of both worlds. And now he knows about 1031 exchanges and DSTs to be able to help you pass on that legacy and get that passive income. Any other last words, guys, before we end the show?
I just want to say, Erica, thank you for the information, because like I said, this is relatively new to me. I had been informed about the 1031, had participated in some 1031s in the past, but this vehicle, like you noted, it, at least in my world, is not something that's talked about frequently. And so I really did appreciate the information you provided today.
I'm so happy to be able to educate more people on this topic, and it goes so much more in depth than what we can get into in this podcast. But I love sharing that knowledge. So thanks for joining us today, and I hope to see you and some of our listeners on Monday at our Lunch and Learn. Come and enjoy a nice little lunch, network, chat, and ask your questions and get some info.
And also, everyone, all of our viewers, please don't forget about the LEARNin San Diego Live tomorrow with Allie Perkins. So it's going to be great with Oak Rock Realty. Don't miss out on any of our shows. Please make sure to join school and be a part of the community, this growing community of subject market educators such as John and Erica and all of these other realtors, so that you don't have to go search for them. We bring them to you, real people in real time with real news. Thank you all so much for watching our show and joining us for the 1031 DST. John Case, Erica Traulsen, thank you so much. And we all hope you have an amazing day today.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Next time.
Bye, guys.
Take care.